Nowadays, every corner of the world has electric flour mills. Electricity has made the whole process so fast and effortless that with just one switch, tons of grain turn into flour. But come with me for a moment, because before engines and grids, a village had to bargain with something older, the river itself. Water was not scenery back then, it was the turning heart of work, and a mill was where that heart beat loudest. So I did what I always wished I could do. I used AI to visualize the whole process for you. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this whole process with me. Before a watermill ever spun, grain still had to become food, and that job was stubbornly physical. Farmers threshed and harvested stalks to free the kernels, and then they winnowed, tossing the mix into the air so the wind could carry away the lighter chaff while the heavy grain dropped back down. Only after that cleaning did the grain become grist, meaning grain prepared for grinding, ready for the millstones. Now picture the older alternative, the hand mill. Someone had to grind every meal by hand again and again, day after day, which meant food came with sore arms and lost hours. That is why the watermill mattered so much. It was one of the earliest ways people harnessed nature to replace human muscle work, alongside the sail. And once you realise that, you can almost feel why a village would treat its mill like a lifeline. Here is the slightly weird but important truth. No single person can honestly be crowned the inventor of the water-powered grain mill. The idea grew in different places over time, as people learned how to link two older inventions, a water wheel and two-threaded gearing, into one steady machine. Still, we do have early witnesses, and they left us clues like footprints in wet clay. Strabo wrote about a water-powered grain mill operating at Kibera in Asia Minor before 71 BC, which tells us the concept was already real, not just imagined. A little later, Vitruvius gave what is commonly cited as the first clear technical description of a geared watermill in the late 1st century BC, showing that, by then, engineers understood how to turn flowing water into controlled rotary power. Meanwhile, far to the east, waterwheels were also finding work. In China, waterwheel technology is documented from around AD 30 for uses like powering trip hammers and other machinery, while firm written evidence for water-powered millstones appears later, by around the 5th century. Now, let me take you back to the way a careful millwright would have done it. A traditional watermill usually started with a good site, a stream or river with reliable flow and enough drop in height to give the wheel proper force. The miller and builders would often divert water from the main river into a man-made channel, called things like a mill race or leat, and guide it toward the wheel. Then came the control, because wild water is useless if you cannot command it. A sluice gate could be raised or lowered to regulate how much water reached the wheel, which meant the mill could be started, slowed or stopped as needed. If the mill used an overshot wheel where water poured over the top into buckets, builders often needed a dam and a mill pond to create height and hold water, because the wheel relied on both the push and the weight of falling water. The wheel itself could be chosen to match the landscape, which is one of those quietly clever parts of old technology. Some wheels were undershot, turning mainly from the speed of water passing under them, which suited fast rivers with less height. Others were breastshot or overshot, better when you had more drop and wanted more efficiency. And still, the wheel was only the beginning. A mill was not just a wheel beside a stream, it was a whole power language, water turning wood and iron turning stone. Don't skip, as we now arrive at the most interesting part. Imagine an early morning and a miller stepping outside to judge the river by its sound. Water is diverted from the source, held, and then, with a deliberate movement, the miller opens the sluice gate and lets the flow bite into the wheel. At first, the wheel moves slowly, buckets filling, paddles catching, and the whole rim taking weight. Then the pace steadies, and the axle begins to turn with purpose. In many classical wheel-driven mills, the axle carried a large gear called a pit wheel, which drove a smaller gear called a wallower on a vertical shaft, speeding things up so the millstones could reach working pace. This speed change mattered because a water wheel might turn rather slowly, while millstones needed far faster rotation for good grinding. One historical description often repeated is that the wheel could turn around 10 revolutions per minute, while the stones might reach around 120. The grain itself is fed down by gravity from a hopper into a feed shoe, and this feed is gently shaken so it does not clog, using a handle that rubs against an agitator called a damsel on the rotating spindle. That movement sends grain through the eye, the central hole of the runner stone, and into the narrowing gap between the runner stone above and the bedstone below. Now think about the sound. It is not a quiet kitchen blender sound. It is a stone roar, a steady gritty thunder as the runner stone's patterned grooves shear, crush, and rub the grain into meal. The flour works its way out from between the stones to the edge, while the casing keeps it from flying everywhere, guiding it toward a meal spout to be collected. Underneath, the runner's stone is supported by a cross-shaped iron piece called a rind, and the miller can adjust the fineness by lifting or lowering the stone slightly, using a tentering mechanism, changing the gap just enough to shift a meal into flour, or flour into something coarser. Anyways, when I first read how the damsel sucked the shoe, I smiled because it is such a small detail, and yet it is exactly what makes old machines feel alive. Once the idea worked, it spread because it solved a daily problem everywhere bread mattered. In the ancient world, you can see water-powered milling scaling up into something almost industrial, especially at the famous Roman-era complex known as the Barbigol Aqueduct and Mills, which had 16 overshot wheels in 2 descending lines, and is often described as the greatest known concentration of mechanical power in antiquity. Estimates for its output vary, however studies commonly cite substantial flour production, enough to support a large population. In medieval Europe, watermills did not just appear, they multiplied. In England, the Domesday Book recorded 5,624 mills, and even that figure is often treated as an underestimate because the record is incomplete. That number matters because it hints at how normal a watermill had become, not a rare marvel, but a familiar part of food life. In 19th century Europe, engineering and historical reviews frequently cite very large counts of waterwheels, with France reporting around 60,000 waterwheels by about 1820, compared with Germany's around 33,500 waterwheels by 1925, and estimates for India are even larger in certain regions, with some studies reporting more than 200,000 traditional watermills in the Indian Himalayan region. So France often comes out highest in those 19th century figures. If you mean most reported in a regional tradition, the Himalayan watermill story is enormous, though figures are presented as reported estimates rather than a single definitive register. Either way, the bigger point is the same. Wherever there were streams and grain, people found ways to turn water into food. And then, coming ahead, the world changed again. Steam engines and later electric motors offered power that did not depend on season, drought, or frozen rivers, and that meant mills could grow larger and more predictable. Even so, waterwheels did not vanish overnight. Sources on waterwheel history note they remained in commercial use well into the 20th century, long after newer power sources existed. In some places, water also became the backbone of more complex milling systems. For example, in the late 18th century, the American inventor, Oliver Evans, famously automated parts of flour production, adding elevators and conveyors so grain and flour could move through the building with less manual carrying. And very often that automation still sat on top of older power sources like water. So before engines did not always mean before innovation. It often meant innovation built out of wood, stone and river force. Now, when I return to the present, I notice something I used to miss. Modern mills are brilliant, fast, clean and dependable. However, they're also quiet in a way that hides their story. The old watermill could never hide. It announced itself in rushing water, creaking timbers, chattering gears, and that flour dust that hung in the air like pale fog. And maybe that is why I wanted to tell this whole process with the help of AI. Because the watermill is not just a machine, it is a conversation between humans and a river.
If you have any special suggestions for me to cover, please let me know in the comments below. I will surely look into it.
Don't forget to hit the subscribe button before leaving and leave a like. If you'd like to get to know more places with the use of AI, please also watch my other videos. Thank you and see you next time.